In life, there are things invisible to the eye that silently erode relationships, trust, and inner peace. One of these is doubt. It's just a little doubt can lead to overthinking, distance, defensiveness, and self-inflicted suffering. Some people lose close relationships because of doubt. Some are afraid to move forward because of doubt. Some live in constant anxiety even when everything seems fine on the outside. In Buddhist philosophy, doubt is not just ordinary skepticism, but one of the deep-seated obstacles that prevents people from reaching inner clarity and peace. In today's video, we will explore what doubt means in Buddhist philosophy, why it is dangerous, how it manifests itself subtly in life, and how each person can recognize and transform it to live a more stable and peaceful life. If you enjoy life lessons that help brighten your mind and bring more peace, subscribe to the Simple Philosophy channel to follow more meaningful content. In the journey of life and self-cultivation, what causes suffering is not always intense emotions like anger, greed, or arrogance. There are states of mind that are very quiet, very hidden, even seemingly normal on the surface, but inwardly they cause weariness, instability, and difficulty in progress for a very long time. Doubt is one such state. It is not always noisy, but it has a very strong power to erode inner strength. Because once a person's heart is no longer firm, no longer clear, no longer knows what to believe in and where to go, then even the right things can become difficult to maintain, difficult to follow, and difficult to see through to the end. Explaining the meaning of the word doubt in Buddhist philosophy. In Buddhism, doubt is hesitation, uncertainty, instability, and not seeing the right path. Doubt is not only about doubting others, but can also mean doubting oneself, doubting the path one is taking, doubting what is right, and even doubting the good values in life. When the word doubt is mentioned, many people immediately think of doubting others. But in Buddhist philosophy, doubt has a much deeper meaning. It is a state of mind that is restless, uncertain, and unclear. A state in which a person is pulled back and forth between different directions, not truly believing, not truly daring to take a step, and not truly letting go of what is holding them back. Doubt can manifest in many forms. Sometimes it's doubting others' sincerity. Sometimes it's doubting one's own abilities. Sometimes it's doubting whether what is right is truly worth pursuing. Sometimes it's doubting whether the path of living a decent, patient, and sincere life is truly worthwhile in a world full of competition and calculation. And sometimes, people even doubt their own feelings, their own choices, and the things they once deeply believed in. Therefore, doubt is not just a fleeting thought, but a prolonged inner state. When the mind is filled with doubt, it is very difficult for people to live fully with anything. They cannot fully believe. They cannot let go. They dare not move forward. They cannot retreat peacefully. It is this state of limbo that causes many people to live in a very weary state that they cannot properly name. It's worth noting that doubt doesn't always appear as something obvious. It's cleverly disguised under the guise of caution, careful consideration, or waiting for the right moment. But if we look deeper, we'll see that some hesitations don't stem from intellect, but from an inner instability. There are times when we haven't taken a step, not because we don't know enough, but because there's still some unnamed doubt lingering in our hearts. Why is doubt considered a major obstacle? Because doubt unsettles the mind. When the heart is constantly filled with suspicion, it is difficult to trust, to let go, to move forward, and to find peace. Doubt divides the inner self between desire and fear, between belief and disbelief, between progress and regression. This fragmentation leads to prolonged weariness. In Buddhism, doubt is considered a major obstacle, not because asking questions is wrong. In fact, knowing how to ask the right questions is a very important part of wisdom. But doubt is different from genuine inquiry. Doubt is when the mind is trapped in uncertainty to the point of losing clarity. It doesn't help one understand more deeply. Instead, it makes the inner self more confused, weaker, and more divided. One of the things that makes doubt so burdensome is that it unsettles the mind. People living in doubt rarely find inner peace. They may laugh, work, talk, and go about their normal lives, but deep down, there's always a part of them scrutinizing, worrying, uncertain, and holding back a bit of defense. This unease, if prolonged, will cause great inner exhaustion. When one is constantly doubting, it is difficult to trust. And without trust, many beautiful things in life struggle to flourish. A relationship is hard to sustain if it is always filled with suspicion. A journey of self-improvement is difficult to go far if one is always doubting oneself. A path of spiritual cultivation is difficult to progress deeply if one constantly doubts the values one is trying to live by. Not only is it hard to believe, but people who harbor much doubt also find it very difficult to let go. Because to let go of something, one needs a certain clarity and inner peace. But when the mind is always doubtful, one easily holds on, becomes defensive, and hesitates. One doesn't dare to place complete trust, but also doesn't truly leave. One doesn't dare to move forward, but also isn't at peace enough to stop. This is a state that drains a lot of life energy. Doubt also hinders people's progress. Many people have no lack of ability, no lack of opportunities, and even no lack of knowledge, yet they remain slow, backward, or stuck. The underlying reason isn't necessarily that they're not ready, but that their hearts aren't strong enough. When a person constantly doubts their own abilities, doubts that their choices might be wrong, and doubts that good things might not exist, it becomes very difficult for them to focus on a single path. The most exhausting thing about doubt is that it divides the inner self. One half wants to move forward, the other half fears. One half wants to believe, the other holds back. One half wants to live authentically, the other fears being hurt. One half wants to change, the other doubts its ability. This fragmentation prevents people from truly living life to the fullest, and living in that state for a long time becomes very tiring. Many people outwardly think they're just overthinking, being cautious, or waiting for a better time. But in reality, what exhausts them is the lingering doubt they haven't recognized. It's like a hazy mist covering their inner selves, making things unclear enough to move forward, yet not light enough to let go. The longer they live in that state, the more they lose their clarity, initiative, and inherent peace. Therefore, recognizing doubt is a crucial step in the journey of self-understanding. It's not about forcing yourself to believe immediately, to be strong immediately, or to be certain immediately, but about beginning to recognize what is causing your inner turmoil. Only when you see the root of your hesitation and doubt can you gradually return to a brighter, more stable, and more peaceful inner self. And that's when doubt ceases to be a silent shadow dragging you down, becoming a lesson to help you understand yourself more deeply and learn to walk with greater awareness. In life, there are states of mind that are easily misunderstood. Some people think they are clear-headed, but in reality, they are overly suspicious. Others think they are simply being cautious, but inside, they harbor a persistent unease. The danger of suspicion lies in its often seemingly rational appearance. It makes people think they are protecting themselves, gaining a deeper understanding of the world, or guarding against evil. But if not clearly distinguished, suspicion can subtly and silently creep into the mind, obscuring clarity, burdening relationships, and making it increasingly difficult to find peace. Therefore, understanding the difference between suspicion, clear-headedness, and caution is a crucial step in avoiding confusion between wisdom and unease. What is the difference between doubt and alertness? Prudence? This is a very important point. Prudence means observing carefully to understand the truth correctly. Doubt, on the other hand, is being drawn into speculation, anxiety, and insecurity that may not even be true. Alertness helps people see things more clearly, while doubt drags them into a spiral of overthinking and loss of peace. Many people live in doubt but think it's wise. They believe they shouldn't trust anyone too much, shouldn't be too open-minded, and shouldn't be too naive. On the surface, this seems true, because life truly requires careful observation, and not everyone is worthy of complete trust. But the issue isn't about being cautious, but about one's inner state while observing. Caution is when a person views things with a clear mind and a calm demeanor. A cautious person will not rush to believe, but neither will they rush to doubt. They observe, listen, compare, and wait for sufficient facts to gain a clearer understanding. They maintain distance when necessary, but do not let that distance turn into prejudice or a silent fear. Caution is a form of wisdom. Doubt, on the other hand, is different. Doubt isn't just uncertainty. It's being drawn into an inner state of speculation, anxiety, and unease. Those who doubt often don't truly observe to understand, but rather observe with a pre-existing worry or negative assumption. Therefore, they don't see things as they are, but through a veil of defensiveness and insecurity. This is a very profound difference. Being clear-headed makes the mind clearer, while doubt makes it more confused. Caution helps people stand firmer, while doubt drags them into a whirlwind of speculation. A clear-headed person can see a problem very clearly without panicking. But a doubtful person, even with just one unclear detail, can conjure up countless scenarios in their head. For example, when something unclear happens, a cautious person will ask themselves, what more facts do I need to understand it better? A suspicious person, on the other hand, will easily wonder, is something wrong? Am I being deceived? Is things going to get worse? One side moves towards clarity, the other towards anxiety. More dangerously, doubt often leads people to believe they see more than others. They think they are insightful, perceptive, or have good intuition. But if you look closely, what they call intuition is often just an unhealed insecurity speaking out. And when insecurity is disguised as awareness, it's very difficult for people to recognize what they are being pulled along by. Therefore, one way to clearly reflect on yourself is to observe whether your mind becomes clearer or heavier after observing something. If, after careful observation, your mind becomes clearer, more stable, and lighter, it is very likely that you are clear-minded. But if, after thinking about it, your mind becomes more confused, more restless, more analytical, and harder to find peace, it is very likely that doubt is creeping in. Suspicion in relationships. This is where suspicion is most likely to cause harm. Once suspicion arises, people tend to view their partner's actions through a lens of doubt. A delayed message, unusual behavior, or unclear statement can be interpreted in many negative ways. And that is what silently damages the relationship. Of all the places where suspicion can arise, relationships are perhaps the most vulnerable, because feelings can only endure when there is trust. Not blind trust, but at least a solid foundation where people can see each other with goodwill instead of suspicion. Once suspicion arises, the way we perceive the other person begins to change. The danger is that it doesn't always erupt into an immediate argument. Often it starts with very small inferences. A delayed reply to a text message, an unusually different attitude, a hesitant remark, a gaze that's not like usual. All of these, viewed with a normal mind, might just be ordinary details. But if seen through the lens of suspicion, they can instantly become signs of something bad. From there, the mind begins to construct stories that may not even be true. Is the other person hiding something? Are they still being sincere? Is something changing that I'm unaware of? If these speculations are repeated long enough, people will begin to react to something that may not exist as if it were true. This is why suspicion can easily damage relationships. Many relationships don't break down because of one major truth, but because of a series of small misunderstandings fueled by suspicion. One person starts to hold back, scrutinize, test, or react coldly. The other feels untrusted, controlled, or viewed with suspicion. And so, distance gradually builds. The most painful thing is that when suspicion takes root, even sincere actions can be misinterpreted. The other person shows concern, but you suspect they're hiding something. They explain, but you think they're avoiding the issue. They remain silent, but you think they're keeping something to themselves. Once suspicion takes over, many beautiful things in a relationship can be distorted. This isn't just happening in romantic relationships. It also occurs in families, friendships, and among colleagues. Some families have lived together for years, but a lack of trust keeps things tense. Some once close friendships drift apart due to unresolved misunderstandings. And some work relationships become strained simply because everyone is wary of each other. Sadly, many people don't realize that what's destroying a relationship isn't always the other person, but rather how they perceive them. When suspicion clouds the mind, it becomes difficult to see the other person for who they truly are. And when you no longer see each other with clarity and goodwill, it's hard to maintain the initial warmth of the relationship. Therefore, suspicion in relationships is not just a matter of trust, but also a matter of inner feelings. When a person harbors too much insecurity, hurt, or unhealed fear, they are more likely to view their loved one with suspicion rather than understanding. And that's what makes them both want to hold on and unintentionally push the other person away. Understanding this is a crucial step. It's not about blindly believing, but about learning to distinguish between what requires discerning observation and what is merely a product of fear.
Yes.
Only by doing so can people maintain relationships with genuine awareness, rather than with an insecure and wary inner self. There are sorrows in life that don't stem from major events, but from subtle things happening within the heart each day. Doubt is one such thing. It doesn't always appear in a big argument or a clear decision, but often creeps in through repetitive thoughts. It's unnameable feelings of unease and incessant questioning. What's more, doubt not only damages relationships with others, but can also erode a person's relationship with themselves. When you lose trust in others, your heart feels heavy. But when you lose trust in yourself, that suffering is far more hidden and profound. This is the story of a relationship broken by suspicion. Some relationships don't break down because of actual infidelity, but because of repeated assumptions. One person suspects, the other becomes weary, and gradually the distance grows. The scary thing is that sometimes what kills trust isn't the truth, but the imagination fueled by insecurity. In relationships, many people think that a relationship only breaks down when there's a clear event, like betrayal, infidelity, or infidelity. But in reality, many relationships die in a much quieter way. They don't collapse because of one major truth, but because of small, repeated doubts that erode trust, little by little. It might start as a very subtle feeling. A reply to a message is slower than usual. A conversation seems shorter than usual. A distant gaze. A sentence that isn't quite clear enough. If viewed with a clear mind, these things might just be the very normal fluctuations of life. But if there is already underlying unease, suspicion will quickly transform these unclear things into countless stories in one's head. People who begin to suspect don't stop at a single thought. They connect one detail to another, interpret one sign with another emotion, and then construct a picture that seems more plausible the more they think about it. From there, they begin to see the person they love, not with trust, but with scrutiny. Every action becomes something to be deciphered. Every small change can be seen as a sign of something happening behind their back. The most painful thing is that many times, the other person didn't actually do anything wrong. They were just busy, tired, had something personal to deal with, or simply didn't have the energy to perform as they used to. But because the other person is viewing everything through a lens of suspicion, even perfectly normal things are blown out of proportion. Over time, the suspicious person will begin to react. This might involve pressing questions, checking, testing, coldness, or reproach. The other person, even if initially willing to explain, will gradually become weary. Weary of being misunderstood. Weary of having to prove something they didn't do. Weary of every word and action being scrutinized under the light of suspicion. And then the distance began to grow. Not because the love ended immediately, but because feelings cannot thrive in a prolonged atmosphere of distrust. The more suspicious one fears losing the other, the more they cling. The more exhausted the suspected one becomes, the more they retreat. In this way, what both fear most is gradually created by themselves. The most frightening thing here is that sometimes what kills faith isn't the truth, but the imagination fueled by insecurity. Something that may not even be true, but is thought about long enough, doubted enough, and reacted to strongly enough, ultimately creates real harm. That's one of the ways doubt silently destroys the most beautiful things in human life. Self-doubt is a very subtle form of suffering. Many people don't doubt anyone else, but they doubt themselves. They constantly question whether they are good enough, capable enough, or worthy. This lack of self-confidence causes them to hesitate, miss opportunities, and live below their true potential. If doubting others makes it difficult for people to find peace in their relationships, then doubting oneself is an even more subtle form of suffering. It's not easily recognized. People who doubt themselves usually don't make a fuss, argue, or immediately damage relationships. But inside, a very tiring internal struggle may be taking place every day. There are people who don't doubt anyone else, but find it very difficult to believe in themselves. They constantly question, am I good enough? Am I capable enough? Am I doing the right thing? Do I truly deserve something good? These questions, if only fleeting, are nothing to worry about. But if they become a prolonged psychological barrier, people can easily become withdrawn. People who doubt themselves often hesitate a great deal. It's not because they lack ability, but because they don't believe in that ability enough to take the first step. They might have a good idea but don't dare to start. They might have an opportunity but don't dare to seize it. They might have feelings but don't dare to open their hearts. They might have value but always think they're not good enough to be recognized. Self-doubt causes people to miss out on many things. Not because life doesn't offer them, but because they retreat before the door truly closes. Many people live below their true potential not because they are incompetent, but because they never truly believe they could go beyond their comfort zone. Sadly, this kind of self-doubt is often masked by a facade of humility or caution. People think they're just being more careful than others, but deep down, it's a fear of failure, a fear of criticism, a fear of not being good enough, and a fear of revealing that they're not as good as people think. It's this fear that keeps them on the edge of their own lives instead of fully embracing them. Self-doubt also makes it difficult for people to enjoy good things when they come. Because even when faced with an achievement, an opportunity, or genuine affection, they may still secretly think they don't deserve it, that it will be lost sooner or later, that perhaps it's just temporary luck. And because they don't believe in themselves enough to hold on to good things, they live more in anxiety than in gratitude and presence. This is a very subtle form of suffering, often invisible to outsiders. They only see someone who seems gentle, careful, humble, or quiet. But inside, that person may be very tired from constantly having to drag themselves through each step with an unstable inner self. Realizing this is crucial, many people think that to change their lives, they need more abilities, more resources, or more opportunities. But sometimes, what they need first isn't anything more, but rather learning to stop doubting themselves excessively. Only when their hearts become stronger, more confident, and clearer can they live closer to their true potential. Ultimately, doubt, whether directed outward or inward, has the same consequence. It unsettles the mind. It makes it difficult to believe, move forward, and live fully in the present. Therefore, recognizing doubt isn't about forcing yourself to be certain of everything immediately, but about beginning to heal the insecurity that keeps your heart wavering. As your inner strength grows, many things outside will naturally become clearer, lighter, and more believable. In the journey of life, there's something that easily makes people stop, not because they lack ability, opportunity, or goodwill, but because there's an inner voice pulling them back. That voice is doubt. It's not as noisy as anger, not as obvious as greed, and not as easily seen as arrogance. But doubt has a very strong resistance, especially on the path of self-cultivation and growth. Because often people don't give up because life is too difficult, but because their hearts are no longer strong enough to continue believing, to continue moving forward, and to continue to the end. This spirit is also very close to the content direction you're building for the Simple Philosophy channel, where articles need to delve into life lessons and develop them into coherent prose. Doubt is a fundamental part of the journey of self-cultivation and growth. Some people, upon beginning to change, doubt whether they can succeed. Others live virtuously for a while, then doubt whether their virtuous lives are truly beneficial. Some want to pursue a deeper path, but doubt whether they are truly suited for it. If doubt is not recognized, it can cause people to give up before they even have a chance to transform. The path of self-cultivation is never easy, not because it's too far-fetched, but because it requires people to go against many old habits, old reflexes, and layers of ego that have long been ingrained within them. And in that process, doubt often appears as a very subtle, but very powerful force. Some people who are just starting to change find themselves with a very familiar question: can I do it? This question may sound ordinary, but if it's not viewed correctly, it can become a seed of giving up. Because when people haven't gone far enough to see results, doubt can easily creep in and make them think their efforts are probably futile. Many people begin to live more disciplined lives, becoming gentler, calmer, less hot-tempered, or less resentful. But after a short time, when they see themselves still stumbling, still reacting the same way, still not achieving what they hoped for, they begin to doubt themselves. They think, maybe I can't change. Maybe I'm just like this. Maybe others can do it, but I can't. This is one of the most common pitfalls of doubt. It leads people to demand results too soon on a journey that requires a great deal of time. And before they have had enough patience, they withdraw from a path that, if they had continued, could have led to profound transformation. Not only do many people doubt themselves, but they also question the value of living a good life. Some live virtuously for a while, but find themselves being wronged, misunderstood, or not receiving the expected response, and then begin to question the point of living a good life. Some endure for a while, but don't find life easier, and then suspect they might be going down the wrong path. Some try to live more deeply, less ostentatiously, less competitively, but when they see others living differently and seemingly doing well, their hearts waver again. In fact, this is a very real challenge in the journey of growing up. Because living a decent, profound, and cultivated life doesn't always yield results as quickly as people might think. It's often subtle, slow, and requires a deep belief in the values one is pursuing. Otherwise, doubt can easily lead people back to old ways of living simply because they feel easier in the short term. Some people want to take a deeper path to understand themselves better, to heal more, to live more mindfully, but then they doubt whether they are truly suited to it. They see others as more introspective, calmer, and more steadfast, while they themselves remain turbulent, unstable, and conflicted. From this, they suspect that perhaps they are not suited to this path. But the truth is, no one embarks on the journey of growing up perfectly ready. Everyone starts from a point of confusion, vulnerability, and uncertainty. No one needs to be perfect to begin. It is the courage to start and keep going that gradually makes a person suitable for the path they choose. Doubt, if not recognized, can cause people to give up before they even have a chance to transform. This is very unfortunate, because the most profound changes don't come in the early stages, but after many times when we think nothing is progressing. If we stop too soon, we will never know that with just a little more patience, our inner selves could have begun to change dramatically. Why does doubt often stem from fear? Behind many instances of doubt lies the fear of being hurt, deceived, abandoned, or failing. When one's heart is not strong enough, people easily become suspicious to protect themselves. Unfortunately, this form of self-defense often ends up causing more pain. To truly understand doubt, one cannot simply look at the surface, the questions or hesitations. One needs to look deeper into its root cause. And behind much doubt, there is often an unhealed fear. Some people doubt others because they have been betrayed. Some doubt feelings because they have been abandoned. Some doubt kindness because they have been taken advantage of. Some doubt themselves because of past failures or excessive criticism. If these old wounds are not examined and healed, they can easily become a defensive barrier in the mind. And one of the most common forms of this defense is doubt. When one's heart is not yet strong enough, doubt gives a feeling of self-protection. If you don't trust too much, you'll hurt less. If you're already suspicious, you'll be less surprised. If you're always prepared for the worst, you'll be less hurt. It sounds logical, but in reality, this is a very expensive form of self-defense. Because when suspicion becomes our way of life, we not only avoid the risk of being hurt, but we also close ourselves off from many beautiful things that could enter our lives. We find it hard to trust anyone completely. It's hard to truly open our hearts. It's hard to embrace new opportunities with all our abilities. It's hard to live lightly and naturally. In other words, to avoid potential pain, we accept living with the weariness that occurs every day. Sadly, this self-defense mechanism often ends up hurting us more. Someone who doubts their feelings to avoid betrayal ends up making the relationship suffocating and distant. Someone who doubts themselves to avoid failure ends up being afraid to take action and losing opportunities. Someone who doubts life's kindness to avoid disappointment ends up living in constant tension and distrust. That's the paradox of doubt. We use it to protect ourselves, but if we don't realize it, it silently becomes something that gradually pulls us away from peace. Therefore, when you find yourself doubting too much, it's not just about forcing yourself to believe. More importantly, gently ask yourself what you're afraid of. What part of yourself are you trying to protect? What untouched pain are you avoiding? Only when you identify the underlying fear can you begin to heal the root cause. Perhaps the most mature thing isn't living as if you've never been hurt, but rather learning to trust with a clearer, deeper, and steadfast heart after experiencing hurt. That's when doubt no longer controls your life, and that's when you begin to walk with true inner strength, not with prolonged defensiveness. There are mental states that don't break people down immediately, but silently erode their peace of mind day by day. Doubt is one such state.
Right.
It doesn't always manifest in big actions or clear decisions. Often, it begins with small thoughts, moments of unease, a desire to double-check, or telling oneself that caution is better. But if not recognized early, doubt can grow and become a way of life. A way of life in which people are always in a state of half-believing, half-fearing, half-wanting to open up, half-wanting to hold back, half-wanting to move forward, half-wanting to be defensive. And it is this way of life that makes the inner self increasingly weary, and many people don't understand why. Signs that suspicion is quietly growing include frequent overthinking, difficulty trusting others, a tendency to check things out, defensiveness, a tendency to think of the worst-case scenario, or a constant feeling of unease, even without clear evidence. These are very common, but often overlooked signs. One of the things that makes doubt so dangerous is that it often doesn't manifest itself clearly. It doesn't always manifest itself immediately. It usually develops subtly, creeping into thoughts, perceptions of others, emotional reflexes, and even very small daily habits. Therefore, if one isn't mindful enough to reflect on oneself, many people will live with doubt for a long time without ever truly recognizing it. The first sign is easily noticeable: frequent misinterpretation. When something unclear happens, instead of leaving it unclear, the mind automatically connects the details and forms a negative narrative. A late message might be interpreted as coldness. A shorter than usual statement might be interpreted as infidelity. A distant gaze might be interpreted as hiding something. What's noteworthy is that all these interpretations usually happen very quickly, almost automatically, to the point that the person involved feels they are plausible. But inference is not the same as seeing clearly. Inference is when the mind fills the void of the unknown with assumptions created by insecurity. And when this happens too often, people gradually lose the ability to see things as they truly are. Another sign is difficulty trusting others. Even if the other person explains, reassures, or clarifies, a part of you still holds back. It's not necessarily an outright denial, but there's always a feeling that it's not certain that they might just be saying that there might be something you haven't seen yet. This kind of distrust can be very subtle, but it creates a huge barrier between people. Along with that comes the habit of constantly checking. Checking your phone, checking what you're saying, checking your facial expressions, checking your behavior, checking if the other person is consistent, checking if everything is exactly as you think. Initially, this is often called caution. But if checking doesn't bring peace of mind and only makes you want to check even more, it's very likely that it's no longer caution, but rather suspicion leading you astray. Another very common manifestation is defensiveness. People who are very suspicious often find it difficult to truly relax in a relationship. They always hold back a part of themselves, afraid to trust completely, afraid to open up fully, afraid to place all their faith in anyone or anything. They live as if they always need to be prepared for something bad to happen. Because they are always on the defensive like that, they find it very difficult to feel truly secure. Doubt is also manifested in a tendency to isolate contemplate the worst-case scenario. Something hasn't happened yet, but the mind quickly jumps to a negative scenario. Small change, but the mind prepares for the worst-case scenario. This isn't simply because the person is pessimistic, but because they lack a solid foundation of trust to allow them to remain in the present. There are people who outwardly appear to live normal lives, work well, speak calmly, and don't cause any trouble. But inside, they always harbor an unsettling unease that's hard to name. Even without clear evidence, their hearts are restless. Even when nothing serious has happened, their minds are still sensing that something is about to go wrong. This is one of the deepest signs of suspicion, and also the easiest to overlook. Why does doubt make it difficult for people to find peace? Because doubt keeps the mind constantly tense. It's not trusting anyone, not trusting yourself, not trusting life itself, makes it very difficult to find peace. People who harbor much doubt often live as if they are always on guard against something happening. So even if they appear normal on the outside, they are still very tired inside. Peace doesn't just come from the absence of external turmoil. True peace comes from having enough inner strength to avoid being easily swept away by things that may not even happen. And that's precisely what doubt weakens most. When a person is filled with doubt, their mind rarely gets complete rest. Even on an ordinary day, in a seemingly stable relationship, or at a job with no major changes, they may still be feeling tense inside. Not tense because of what's happening, but because they're constantly on guard against what might happen. This is a very subtle but draining kind of fatigue. Not trusting anyone makes it difficult to find peace in relationships. You'll always be scrutinizing, guarding, guessing, and mentally preparing for the possibility of misunderstanding, betrayal, or abandonment. Not trusting yourself makes it difficult to find peace in your choices. You'll always hesitate, doubt your own decisions, and fear you're not good enough or are going in the wrong direction. Not trusting life makes it difficult to find peace in your own journey. You'll see everything is fragile, easily lost, and hard to rely on. When these three pillars of belief are shaken, it's difficult for the heart to find rest. That's why some people, even when not experiencing major upheavals, still feel prolonged exhaustion. They may sleep, but not truly rest. They may laugh, but not truly feel lighthearted. They may live a normal life, but inside, they are constantly tense. People who are constantly suspicious live as if they are always on guard. And when they live like this for too long, their bodies and minds become accustomed to this state of tension as normal. They no longer realize they are tired because the fatigue has become the foundation. But this foundation makes it difficult for them to experience deep joy, to truly believe, to let go, and they are easily drawn into endless cycles of thought. Sadly, many people think the problem lies with other people, circumstances, or that life isn't safe enough. But sometimes, what exhausts us isn't the outside world, but the lack of inner peace. And doubt is one of the things that robs us of that peace the most. Recognizing this is crucial. Only by correctly identifying our weariness can we begin to heal it from its root. Doubt isn't something to be hated or suppressed. It's a signal that something within us isn't strong enough, not healed enough, or not embraced enough. When we see that, we'll blame ourselves less and begin to focus on nurturing the roots of our inner selves. And from there, the journey to peace truly begins. It's not by forcing yourself to believe everything immediately, but by gradually calming your fears, healing your anxieties, and rebuilding a strong inner strength so that you no longer have to live in constant vigilance. As your heart becomes stronger, doubt will gradually take root. And when doubt recedes, the peace you've been searching for will have a chance to truly blossom from within. There are wearinesses in life that don't stem from external turmoil, but from the constant state of caution, speculation, and self-defense within oneself. Doubt is one of the silent roots of this state. It not only burdens relationships, but also drains inner strength from the constant vigilance over something that may never happen. But the important thing is that doubt isn't immutable. It can be recognized, understood, and transformed if one is honest enough to look within oneself. And that journey doesn't usually begin with grand gestures, but with learning to distinguish between truth and fear disguised as reason. The method for identifying and transforming doubt? The first step is learning to separate facts from speculation. Ask yourself, is there clear evidence for what you're worried about? Or is it just a scenario in your head? When you stop to observe, you'll be less led astray by suspicion and begin to see things more clearly. To transform doubt, one must first learn to see it. This sounds simple, but it's the most difficult step. It's most of the time those who doubt don't realize they're doubting. They think they're simply more sensitive, more cautious, more insightful, or have better intuition. Therefore, doubt often remains dormant within the mind for a long time without being detected. The first step in recognizing doubt is learning to separate facts from interpretations. This is a crucial inner skill, yet few people truly practice it, because in daily life, much suffering doesn't stem from the facts themselves, but from how the mind interprets those facts in a negative light. For example, someone hasn't replied to a message. That's a fact. But immediately afterward, the mind can instantly add many layers of speculation. They're bored with me. They're hiding something. They're no longer interested. Something's wrong. The subsequent thoughts are no longer the truth, but scenarios constructed by the mind. Therefore, when you feel uneasy, try to stop and ask yourself a very important question. Is there clear evidence to support my worries, or is it just a story in my head? This question is very powerful because it helps to cut the momentum of speculation. It won't make all the worries disappear immediately, but it gives you a space to avoid being swept away by emotions right away. The valuable thing about pausing is that it gives people the ability to observe. When we don't react immediately, don't jump to conclusions. Don't immediately believe every thought that pops into our heads. We begin to have the opportunity to see things more clearly. Often just stepping back a little reveals that some things aren't as scary as we thought. Another crucial step in transforming doubt is learning to observe the underlying emotion. Much doubt doesn't truly stem from others or the current situation, but rather from an old wound, an old fear, or a long-standing feeling of insecurity. If you only address the surface, the doubting thoughts, without touching the root of the fear, the doubt will return in a different form. Therefore, whenever you find yourself doubting yourself excessively, try asking yourself, what within you is being affected? Are you afraid of being abandoned, betrayed, looked down upon, or not good enough? The answer may not be easy to hear, but that honesty is the first door to true healing. When we learn to pause and observe, we become less susceptible to being led astray by doubt. This is crucial. Doubt is only powerful when we immediately believe it and follow it. But when we view it as a fleeting mental state, rather than as an absolute truth, its power gradually diminishes. As a result, we are no longer easily swayed as before. Practices to reduce doubt in daily life include communicating clearly, asking instead of guessing, listening instead of jumping to conclusions, and most importantly, cultivating inner strength. The stronger one is internally, the less doubt will drag them down. Simultaneously, build trust little by little through genuine experiences and honesty with yourself. After recognizing the doubt, the next step isn't to force yourself to believe immediately, but to start living differently, little by little. And that change needs to be in the most ordinary aspects of life. One of the most important practices is to cultivate clear communication. Much doubt is nurtured not because the truth is too complex, because people don't clearly express what they feel and don't ask for clarification on what they don't understand. Without clear information, the mind easily fills the gaps with inferences. So instead of guessing, practice asking. Instead of keeping things to yourself and interpreting them, practice speaking calmly and honestly. It's not to interrogate or control, but to understand better. Misunderstandings can last for days, months, or even years, simply because people are afraid to ask a simple question or fear hearing an answer they don't like. Along with that comes learning to listen instead of jumping to conclusions. When doubts are already ingrained, people easily listen to others with the mindset of finding fault or looking for signs to confirm their fears. But true listening is about understanding, not about reinforcing one's own doubts. Simply changing the way you listen can reduce misunderstandings and tension in many relationships. However, the most important thing is to cultivate a stronger inner self. Because if there is too much insecurity inside, then no matter how clear things are to outsiders, one can still continue to doubt. The stronger a person is internally, the less likely they are to be dragged down by doubt, not because they are more naive, but because they have enough inner strength not to be swept away by every fear that arises. Cultivating inner strength is not something that happens overnight. It comes from being honest with yourself, keeping your promises to yourself, practicing small daily disciplines, learning to calm your emotions instead of being swept away by them, and most importantly, knowing how to rely on your inner values rather than clinging to the reactions of others or the stability of your circumstances. When people begin to trust themselves more, they will doubt others less. When they know they are strong enough to stand up if something bad happens, they will live less in a state of constant vigilance. Much of the doubt doesn't actually stem from the world being too dangerous, but from a lack of inner security to face an undesirable situation if it truly occurs. At the same time, trust needs to be nurtured little by little, not by blindly believing in everything, but through genuine experiences and honesty with oneself. Give yourself the chance to see that not everyone will hurt you. Not every silence is betrayal. Not every change is a sign of loss. Not every fear is a correct intuition. Every time I dare to ask instead of guessing, dare to listen instead of jumping to conclusions, dare to stay with the truth instead of following a script in my head, the doubt weakens a little. And every time I live more authentically with my emotions, my fears, my limitations, and my needs, my trust is rebuilt a little. Transforming doubt isn't about becoming gullible or naive. It's about becoming alert enough not to be led astray by fear, clear-sighted enough to distinguish truth from speculation, and strong enough to live without constantly withdrawing into yourself. When you achieve that, you not only become less suspicious, but also much less tired. And that is a very deep form of peace, a peace that comes from an inner self that no longer lives in constant vigilance. There are times in life when people don't truly suffer because of what has happened, but because of things they imagine might happen. A small silence is enough to unsettle the heart. A slight change is enough to cause unease. An unclear statement can be twisted into countless scenarios in one's mind. That's when doubt is silently at work. And the thing is, the longer one lives with doubt, the more easily one mistakes it for normal self-preservation. But in reality, prolonged doubt doesn't make one safer. It only makes one more tired, less trusting, and less able to live lightly. Therefore, the biggest practical lesson of this topic is not about how to be certain of everything out there, but about how to make one's inner self strong enough to withstand uncertainty. A practical lesson for the audience. If today you find yourself feeling anxious, prone to overthinking, suspicious, or having difficulty trusting others, perhaps what you need is not just answers from others, but inner peace to prevent every moment of silence from turning into fear. This is a very real lesson, very close to everyday life. Many people still think that if they have enough answers from the outside, their hearts will be at peace. If the other person explains more clearly, if the circumstances are more certain, if life gives them more assurance, perhaps they will doubt and fear less. But in reality, many times even with answers, the heart is still not truly at peace. Because what causes the deepest insecurity in people is not always a lack of information, but often a lack of inner stability. If you find yourself prone to overthinking today, don't rush to find evidence to quell that anxiety. Look deeper and consider why your heart is so easily swayed. Is it because you're too tired? Is it because you've been hurt before? Is it because you've lived with a long period of insecurity? Is it because you lack the inner strength to remain calm in the face of uncertainty? These questions are far more important than trying to control everything around you. Some people always want to know everything immediately to be sure. They want others to respond quickly, clearly, and to show enough to reassure them. But the truth is, life doesn't always give people immediate certainty. There are moments of silence that are simply moments of silence. There are changes that are simply changes. There are things that are unclear that are simply unclear, and not necessarily omens of something bad. The problem is that when one's inner self isn't at peace, it's easy to turn every moment of silence into fear. An unanswered message becomes a sign of distance. Unusual behavior becomes a sign of infidelity. A day that doesn't go as planned becomes a sign of a breakdown. This is how suspicion weighs heavily on the heart, sometimes without even realizing it. Therefore, a crucial practical lesson is to cultivate inner peace before demanding that life be always clear-cut. Inner peace doesn't mean being free from worry, sadness, or fear. Rather, it means that even when you worry, feel sad, or fear, you're not easily swept away by them. You still have a space to pause, reflect, and avoid rushing to turn emotions into reality. To achieve that, start with very small things. When you feel insecure, don't react immediately. When you have doubts, don't jump to conclusions. When things aren't clear, give yourself more time instead of forcing everything to become clear while your emotions are still high. That's not being slow, but being mature. Because many mistakes in life don't come from a lack of intelligence, but from reacting too quickly when one's heart isn't at peace. At the same time, learn to cultivate a sense of security from within. Get more sleep, live a more balanced life, reduce stress, be more honest with your emotions, and keep your promises to yourself more often. These things may sound very ordinary, but they are the foundation of a strong inner self. When your inner self begins to find its footing, you will be less dependent on constant validation from others to feel safe. In summary, the profound meaning of doubt in Buddhist philosophy is significant. In Buddhism, doubt is not just a fleeting feeling, but an obstacle that prevents the mind from finding peace and the intellect from becoming clear. When doubt diminishes, one will stop overthinking. When overthinking stops, the heart will feel lighter. And when the inner self is sufficiently strong, one will no longer be easily controlled by invisible fears. Looking at it from a deeper perspective, doubt in Buddhist philosophy is not just about doubting people, life, or circumstances. It is a state of mind that prevents a person from remaining still in clarity. When doubt arises, the mind is divided. One part wants to believe, the other fears believing. One part wants to move forward, the other pulls back. One part wants to open its heart, the other wants to close it off for self-protection. It is this division that exhausts a person. And because the mind is restless, the intellect is also unclear. This is a very profound point. When doubt drags one down, they no longer see things as they truly are. They see them through a veil of insecurity, old wounds, and unhealed fears. Therefore, the same event will be seen differently by someone with a calm mind than by someone consumed by doubt. That is why Buddhism views doubt as an obstacle. It's not because people are not allowed to question or be cautious, but because if doubt becomes a constant state of mind, it will prevent people from reaching true peace. A mind constantly filled with doubt is difficult to find peace. When the mind is not at peace, the intellect is difficult to enlighten. And when the intellect is not enlightened, people easily create more suffering for themselves from things that may not even be true. When we doubt less, we overthink less. This is a very important transformation, because most of the weariness in our inner lives doesn't come from the truth, but from the layers of meaning we attach to it. When we doubt less, we stop telling ourselves negative stories. When we stop telling ourselves negative stories, our hearts feel lighter. When our hearts feel lighter, we can begin to see things more clearly, more lightly, and more accurately. Ultimately, the most valuable thing that the journey of transforming doubt brings is not just less worry, but a sufficiently strong inner self that is no longer easily controlled by invisible fears. At that point, people don't need to know everything to feel at peace. They also don't need to control everything to dare to live. They begin to learn how to live life with a more alert heart, a clearer perspective, and deeper inner strength. And perhaps that is the most beautiful meaning of understanding and transforming doubt. It's not to become gullible or naive, but to become someone who is clear-sighted enough to see things clearly, steadfast enough not to be overly afraid, and calm enough not to torment oneself with things that only exist in the imagination. When that is achieved, the heart will feel much lighter. And the peace that everyone has been searching for all along turns out to begin the very moment one stops, letting doubt silently guide their life.